Okay. Cheers.
Cheers. Straight into the cheers. I love it.
Listen to the ice, everybody.
Clink, clink, clink. It's another Thursday that feels like a Friday. We're recording.
It really does.
Allie, we were just talking before we started here about how Allie just got back from New Orleans. And we want to hear the story about karaoke. So what happened?
So I was never really a big karaoke girl. I know we're going to talk about identity and stuff today, which I'm really excited about. But somewhere in the last 3 years, I've adopted this like, fuck it mindset. Like few free drinks in. I don't know anybody in the crowd. Like, this is fun.
Love it.
And usually I it's okay. Like nowhere near, professional level, but I do okay. Well, the Cat's Meow. It's a karaoke bar in New Orleans. It's on Bourbon Street. Really fun. I totally bombed on the trip. I did Blink-182, What's My Age Again, which if you think about it, is just like really fast talking.
Yes.
And I kind of forgot about that because I had chosen the song after I started drinking.
Oh no.
Mistake number one.
Rookie mistake.
It was so bad. Guys, I like messed up. Like how like the words like turn different colors as the song goes. Didn't do that. I lost track of the lyrics. And there was one point even where there was a girl in the front row that was like, watch me, I'll help you.
Oh my God.
Oh no.
And I think it was because I was like almost too intoxicated. I don't know. But the funny part is I walked off the stage and I was like, not my best work. And then I just moved on with my life. And I was like, this is growth. Because a year ago, I would have still been thinking about it to this day. Mm-hmm. And I just think it's funny now.
And today it's a funny anecdote. Good for you.
Yeah.
Hashtag growth.
Not my best work. Usually
you did it alone. It wasn't like a group effort.
No. Yeah. No.
Okay. In a similar vein, I was in Miami earlier this week for a work trip. I found a hammock. I laid in the hammock. No one was around. The hammock was pulled very tight. I got stuck upside down. A girl walks into this area, sees me hanging upside down, and I'm like, this is happening. And I had to fucking somersault out of that thing so ungracefully. And I was just like, this is happening. And she said nothing. And she should have been like recording it or something. It had to look so funny, but I was just like, this is happening. And then I just fell.
The money I would pay to have walked up and seen that.
My God. But, what can you do? Sometimes you just get in, you got to deal.
Embarrassing moments. Well,
nothing embarrassing has happened to me in the past week.
Wow. So. Cool. Great.
I have nothing to share.
But this is, maybe I'm not living life as well as you do. You're out there making it happen.
Is that a baseline for living?
Embarrassment? Maybe. You're putting yourself out there. Putting yourself out there.
It's a risk.
Embarrassment is bound to happen. Yes.
Taking risks. All right. Making moves.
So, makes me feel even better.
Life lessons.
Yeah. Cool. Speaking of life lessons, this is a beautiful transition into our topic today. So, listeners, today we're talking about the constant evolution of the self. That's, I feel like, the simplest way to put it. And
just a simple, constant evolution of the self.
What a segue.
What a simple topic.
Is part of that. Growth is part of it. So it started with this article that I sent them. It's basically about Don Quixote. If you're not familiar with that story, it's this very old story about a guy who thinks that he is like a knight. And so he puts on a coat of armor and he goes and he fights windmills, and it's all very delusional. But to him, it's all very true. Like, he truly believes that he's a knight and he has crusades to go on and all these things. So it's basically like, reality is whatever you make it. Your story of your life is whatever you make it. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Where should we start? Where do we even begin with this? Any high-level things you'd like to start out with? Thoughts, musings, questions, concerns?
Let me pull up.
I feel like it's simultaneously freeing and scary that like you can be whatever you like, your truth. And this kind of goes from the last episode we talked about, like, what is real, what is your truth, how there can be multiple truths. But like, there's also people that are just delusional, like very delusional. So I was reading the article and I was like, man, where's the line? Because I feel like we all know where the line is. Like, you kind of know when you look at someone, you're like, yeah, you're not in touch with reality. But what does that mean? That other people determine your reality for you? Like I think it's meant to kind of open the door to all these kind of questions. But that was my first thought is like,
yeah.
Ooh. Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, it's hard because I feel like, I don't know if y'all felt this way, but after reading it, it felt like only one thing was allowed to be true at once or something. Like one story about yourself was allowed to be true at once. Because otherwise, like, what was true? But I think there are many versions of you and many stories of who you are, and they're kind of all true at once. Like that is how I think of it. So yeah, I don't know. That's like my immediate thoughts after reading.
Yeah. I think for me, when I read the article, and we'll link to it in the show notes if anybody's curious, all 12 of you. But I thought that what was interesting is like, you kind of have to make yourself the protagonist in your own story. This was kind of the idea that I walked away with. You have to make yourself the protagonist in your own story because no one else is going to do that for you. No one else is going to take like a supporting character role because they're all doing the same thing too. They're the main character in their story. And so I feel like this whole like main character energy, it's very buzzy right now. A lot of people talk about it and poke fun at it and kind of like, oh, I'm out here main charactering. It's like a become a verb, but it's really what we're all doing all the time. And so I wanted to kind of dive into that a little bit deeper and be like, okay, what does this mean? And what do you do with that information? So my first question is, what do you think about this idea that you're kind of playing a character of yourself? This was in the article too. You're kind of playing a character of yourself from your late teen and early adulthood years until you arrive, hashtag air quotes, at who you are as an adult. So then you either have to consolidate those two different versions and shed what no longer feels true, or find a way to let those internal truths that you know about yourself and about your life form an entirely new version of your life. So I guess this is like how we arrive at things like midlife crisis and existential crisis. It's when people have these moments of, oh shit, I've been playing a version of myself and that version no longer feels true. Now what? What do you think about that? Do you feel like it has to be either or do you feel like there's a version where it's a little bit of both things?
I feel like both. Again, it's like I feel like all things are true, right? Like I don't think it has to be one or the other where like you're playing this character and then all of a sudden maybe something happens and it creates like a different quote unquote version of you and then you have to like shed everything and now you're this new version of yourself. Like I don't really agree with that. Like literally last weekend I had some friends in town from college and it was just so nice because like I have changed so much since college. We all have. But also they reminded me of what has not changed. And it was so nice to like see that like the nuggets of who I am or like the thread of like me that runs through like all these versions of myself I've been since that period of time. And so I feel like it's like it builds on each other, right? Like I don't think that necessarily you have to like shed the old versions of you. It's all just kind of building on each other.
Okay. It's fair.
Yeah. Yeah, I see them like as parts of a whole. And maybe you give more airtime to certain parts of yourself, or maybe there are parts that you retire, like they're not necessarily dead, but they're still part of you. They're just kind of on the shelf and you honor them and you like appreciate them for the role they played to getting you where you are today. But the idea of shedding parts of myself, it feels like, because I feel like one day I'll be in a chapter of life and I'll look back at this period and I'm like, I don't want to forget who I am today. Like, but I also anticipate and I hope that I'm different in the future. Like, I hope I'm always changing and growing a little bit. That is just personally how I want to age. And there, like, I do look back at where I was in like my late 20s or my late teens, early 20s. And I'm like, holy shit, I'm so glad I'm not that person anymore. But I don't want that to just be a big black box of my memory.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of friendships and relationships that have lasted to today, that were born during that time. And yes, they've had to adapt. And yes, we're all different, like Krista said. But I don't know, shedding them feels like you're only looking forward and you're never looking backwards. And I do feel like part of growing is being able to look back and reflect and be like, oof, that was embarrassing. Speaking of embarrassing, but like, okay, I made it through. All is well. Here's what I learned. So maybe we won't be that person anymore, but that's still a part of me.
Yeah. I think for me, the thing that I took when I read this and thought about this particular question was it's kind of related to last week's topic of like, if you're not good at listening to your internal voice, you will become a stranger to yourself. And so what happens is then you have to start back at square one and start over and be like, ooh, I made a lot of choices that did not line up with what felt true to me. And so now I have to start over again. And I don't think it's this thing of like, I have to ditch everything and start completely fresh, but I think it's about, ooh, I have to draw some hard lines here and I have to really be honest with myself about like what choices was I making for me and what choices was I making for everybody else. And so it's kind of a product of like if you lose that inner voice and that inner narrator, that's I think how you arrive at this place of like, oh no. Now I
Yeah.
have a lot to change because you
Yeah.
weren't listening to yourself all along the way. And so you get
Yeah.
so far off course and then the course correction is very difficult.
I will say one thing that has helped because I definitely had a period where I was like, I don't want to be this person anymore. I'm doing everything for other people. And that is a part of myself that I was happy to shed, like the people pleasing nature. But I will say, like when I started to become aware of the fact that I was listening more to outside voices than my own, I did go through a period of like anger and kind of resentment toward myself. And while that was kind of fair to feel that way, it did kind of delay this period of coming back to like center. And so I think one thing I wish I did differently when I became aware of that is kind of give myself grace, which had seemed like kind of like, why would I be okay with this? Like, why would I tell myself like, this is fine? I need to be mad. I need to like make a change. But it ended up pushing myself farther away from center before I was able to come back around. And I wish I was a little bit more gracious and accepting of like, I didn't know better. Like
Yeah,
this is
you
just
didn't
life.
know. Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Even if you look back and you're like, "Oh, shit." It's like, "Well, I learned from it." That's the positive spin on it. It's like, "Okay, I can work with that information and not get sucked into the black hole of like shame and embarrassment and beat myself up over it. I can learn from it and move forward and try to do better." Krista, any other thoughts there? I thought you were going to say something.
Oh, no. I'm just
Okay.
taking it all
Just
in.
nodding in agreement.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I liked that he says that we never fully arrive at a finished version of ourselves. We're always changing. This is true of everything, right? Like we as individuals are always changing. The world around us is always changing. So he said that we never arrive at a fully finished version. We like to think that we have, right? We like to be like, I figured it out. I made it. Like, I'm perfect now. I don't have anything to work on. Everything is great. Never true. Absolutely never true. And if it is, that's a problem. But I think I'm curious. I want to hear it. So, what are some past versions of yourself that you've had to shed or let go? Or like old tropes that other people made up for you that like just no longer feel true? You can't hold them up anymore. A perfect example of this for me is like I was always the dumb blonde at family gatherings, and like I could play into it. It was like ha ha funny, but then there got to be a point where I was like, I can't do this anymore because it's not real and it's not true, and it feels so it feels so ick to keep playing this character of myself. So, what about you? What are some past characters you had to shed?
For me, I think I was always seen as the like irresponsible one in my
Mm,
family or like the wild card or something. Cause like, I mean, I think growing up, like I'm definitely the weird relative. Like I'm the weird kid, the weird cousin. I just am like,
weird how? Weird how?
well, I mean, like most of my family, they're still in my hometown. So all my cousins are there, all my aunts and uncles for the most part. I think both my brother and my sister got very like respectable, good jobs right out of college. And I was like, I'm going to go to LA and sleep on a mattress on the floor and not have health insurance. And like, I just was the weird kid. I don't know. And I think that was, it like gave me the brand, I guess, of like, I'm irresponsible. I'm like, oh, you never know what Krista's going to do. And like, who knows what she's up to. And I've had to fight against it. I think I've at one point tried to overcorrect it. And like Allie said, I've had to like come back to the center of that and like just be okay with that part of myself or I guess how people used to see me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Allie?
Oh man, I had classic eldest daughter energy where I was
I'm
like
familiar.
I think I just grew up too fast and not in the way that I was like exposed to stuff too early, but I was trying to be an adult so young. Like I was touring colleges when I was 14, like freshman year.
Goodness.
I don't really know why. It didn't really do anything for me. I think it just like felt cool and like, oh, look at me growing up. Super jarring when I graduated college. But even in college, like I was on scholarship and I worked 3 jobs. I never really had a lot of fun. I was also in that pretty bad relationship I've talked about a little bit. And I think I was just always the smart, organized, like professional one. And it's tough to look down on that because it's obviously gotten me to where I am today, which I'm really grateful for. And I really love my career. But now I feel like I'm like doing shit at 30 that I never got a chance to do at like 22 or 20, even 25, really. And I'm probably going too far in the other direction, but whatever. I'll find my way back. I think otherwise, like part of that was like people pleasing energy for sure. Very fear based, pessimistic. Would always think of like worst case scenario stuff first, wanted to be prepared, et cetera, et cetera. And then I also think I was bucketed pretty clearly into this like introvert definition. And I do think I am introverted in the sense that like I get energy from being alone, but I've also seen it recently defined as I prioritize peace. And sometimes you find that when you're alone. But I also think if you're around the right people, you can find peace. And I think I just spent time around the wrong people for way too long.
Yeah.
And I think I just was thinking that was why. I was like, I'm so tired all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's because my friends, this is way back, they sucked. Yes. And I thought it was me.
Yeah.
I thought it was my fault. And now I'm like, nope.
That's a great point. I think that that's one of the things that happens as you get older. You realize how finite your energy is on a daily basis. And you're like, I don't have time to pretend and expend all this energy trying to like entertain and interact with people that I don't really jive with. And so what happens is they kind of self like select out of the process. And what you're left with are people who give you energy or who don't require a heavy lift to hang out. And so you get this like realer version of like, oh, these are the people that I can hang out with and it doesn't cost me. I don't leave feeling depleted. And I for sure was on that same page too of like, oh, let me hang out with anyone and everyone just because they say they want to. Doesn't matter about what I want. If they want to, then yes, I should. And it just costs too much at a certain point and you're like, ooh, I can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was pretty lonely in school. And then after school, I would accept any and every social invitation.
Yes.
Just for sake of just being around other people, even though I hated half people. I didn't hate the people. I hated how I felt around some of the people I was spending time with. And it just bred this sense of like FOMO, you know? And now I think I'm like recalibrating where I'm like a little bit more selective. I do appreciate being a part of a lot of different friend groups and a lot of different activities, but I do feel a little bit more in touch with like, does this feel right to me? Like that just was never my thought process before. Am I doing things? Is my calendar full? Even though like deep down I would like dread most things. I was like, okay, what am I going to talk about? I have to have 3 talking points ready.
Yes.
Like that was literally what I would do.
It's exhausting. It's so exhausting.
Yeah.
Ugh, 100%. So what are, yeah, no, thank you. What are the things that you do to be really deliberate and intentional about figuring out who you are, basically? Are there any activities that you found that help you get back to that place of like, this rings really true for me? So maybe it's journaling, maybe it's like going to therapy. It could be a lot of things. But is there anything that you found to be really effective at like, I need to get better at listening to myself and I'm really curious about myself. How can I be more deliberate about figuring out who that person is?
I wrote down a couple of things.
Yeah.
Because it took me a bit to think on this. Um, Spending time alone generally is really helpful for me. I think we talked last episode about like how do we get in touch with like our voice, like figure out what's real for us. And I think like not isolating essentially, but like going on walks by myself, no podcast, no music, staying in on the weekends, like even if Austin's going out, just like kind of doing my own thing and doing what feels right for me and not following like the shoulda, coulda, woulda like mentality. Um, Doing things that scare me specifically for me has been really good because I've always been very fear based. So like improv, like I literally signed up just because it freaked me out and then getting through it and being like, that was still scary. Like I should have been a little scared, but like I survived. I'm fine. Um, Reading actually like specifically fiction has been really interesting just in learning and immersing yourself in all these different worlds and all these different mindsets and perspectives. And I actually saw a quote, I don't even know if it's a quote or like a statistic or something, that's like the fiction readers tend to have higher empathy because they just have lived so many lives, even those that they have never been exposed to. um and I'll just say it, but like doing cannabis quite often has really helped like slow my brain down, help me like think through things, like really process and see things from all kinds of different perspectives and not have such a visceral emotional reaction. Um, that's been key for me, truly.
Yeah, it's good. It slows things down. It quiets the noise. I will say that, which is really good for those reflective periods when you're trying to like, if you're a high achiever, if you're in high gear all the time, you kind of need an assist to slow things down a little bit, and that
Oh yeah.
helps.
Yep.
Yeah. What
Krista,
about you, Krista?
So I feel like there's two parts to that question. So the first part is, what do I do for like self-discovery? I think I tend to jump pretty headfirst into things that I even think I might be interested in. Like drum lessons. Like I took drum lessons, very quickly found out I'm not someone who has the time to devote to drum lessons, but maybe one day. But it's like stuff like that. Like I like to try things, and it's okay if they don't work out or like I can't fully pursue it or whatever, but it's like that for me has been the best way to keep learning about myself and what I like and what I'm good at, what I'm not good at. I think in terms of like coming back to who I am or reminding myself of that, I tend to reread a lot. Like if there's something I have that has really resonated with me or I feel like makes me feel seen or heard or whatever, I will come back to that a lot. Like I just reread or I'm rereading Untamed. There are lots of like podcast episodes I will revisit for that purpose. I like to do that. It's very comforting and it like helps kind of reiterate a lot of that in my brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I think it's sometimes one of those things of like you read something once and it really hits, but humans are forgetful and our memory capacity is so limited. It's like you do have to revisit sometimes to get things to really stick. And sometimes you listen to something once and you come back to it and it's like, "Oh, wow, that's still true," or "I didn't think that that would still resonate in the same way or maybe in a different way." I think that that's helpful. I think that that's my answer too. I'm glad you said that, Allie, about reading. I think as somebody who is over indexed on listening to external sources, the one saving grace of that is that by being a really avid reader, I've been able to try on a lot of different perspectives. And the great thing about fiction is that, especially with female writers, you really get a peek inside their inner dialogue, the things that they're thinking but not saying out loud. And so what happens as a product of that is sometimes you get language for things that you felt but haven't known how to explain in an easy to understand way. And when somebody else gives you those words and it kind of clicks in, you're like, oh, right. that's what I'm trying to say. I just didn't have the right words. And so it kind of crystallizes thoughts and feelings into words in a way that makes it easier to communicate, easier for yourself to understand. And again, sometimes you don't know how to say the things. And so it kind of lives inside your head in this fuzzy, blurry, hard to share state. And when you read, you get these very concrete descriptions of like, this is what I experienced and this is what I felt. And you're like, yes, that.
Yes.
It's really helpful. It's kind of magical.
It is. I've learned and processed and moved through so many things in my adult life through the eyes of fictional characters, usually fictional women. It's been kind of good to like observe a fictional character going through something that I'm going through, but seeing them go through it and come out the other side. And I think like we've talked about how TV, our respective shows have gotten us through tough periods. But the thing about reading and books is you're so immersed in the inner dialogue. And so not only are you seeing like, this character is going through the same thing I am, but they're thinking about it the same way I am, or they're having the same insecurities, or they're having the same realizations. And like with TV, sometimes you get that, but it's mostly observation and like kind of perceiving what that character is feeling. And I think it's a good compliment. I think both are good too, but I just like books. Like it just feels so immersive, like living a gazillion lives. Just helps me a lot.
Yeah. Do you have any standout book recommendations for things that come to your mind of like,
oh God,
I'm putting you on the spot here. So of course it's impossible, but
I just reorganized my library.
Immediately think of any life-changing book, Allie, on the spot.
I
should have put this in the doc so it could play.
I mean, you guys know that I love romance and I feel like it gets a really bad rap, but honestly, like, I'm just, so many. I will think and share at the end.
Well, yeah, we'll come back. What about you, Krista?
I want Allie to say more about romance and why does that feel so, like, why you feel so connected to that in that way that you would recommend that as potentially like a life-changing.
I don't know if I would recommend like the whole genre, because I definitely think there's like a sliding scale of, frankly, quality. And then there's some, of the book talk type books that serve a purpose, right? You're just a quick break from reality. It's 250 pages, like cool. But there are some like series I've read that are just so, I mean, romance is how it's categorized because that's like the primary conflict, and like the main characters are generally building toward a love story. I forget how the genre is defined. But I just appreciate when romance novels, how you also get insight into like friendships. Like I think the female friendship and its life cycle through a romantic relationship is super interesting to me. Like maintaining and investing in female friendships alongside having a partner and investing in that partner. Like that's frankly been a component that I've not been very good at. I've always been like all in on my partner, and I just kind of like let my friendships fall to the wayside. And it sucks, right? Like you need your girlfriends. You need
that's a good health check. You're right. That's a good way. Like, can I maintain this relationship and also have friendships? That's a good temp check.
Because I think like a lot of people call their partner like their best friend, which I think is true, but you can't replace like female friendships. And there's also utility into having variety of friendships, like where there's some friendships that are separate from your romantic relationship, and that's really good to keep those. But I think with romance novels, I just love the way it's usually female author too, which I think I like. They just write about like the female friendship. They write about the family relationship, the sibling relationship. Like I just like the way that it like complements the love story. In the books that stand out to me, that's something that I really like.
Yeah, that's a good point. Krista, do you have any standout books? You said you're rereading Untamed, so obviously that's a big one.
Yeah. I was hoping you would forget to circle back to me.
Oh boy.
Nope. Yeah, I mean that's what I recommend. I mean, it's top of mind obviously because I'm rereading it, but I read it for the first time last fall, and I just really like how it deconstructs just everything you are used to feeling as a woman, like the need to worry about other people's feelings other than your own, or the need to martyr yourself in favor of everybody else's needs other than your own. Lots of good like parenting stuff in there about what it means to be a mom and like take care of yourself and your kid and their needs and your needs. Yeah, I highly recommend if you've never read it. Yeah, that's the one I'm going to recommend because I can't think of anything else.
Yeah. I think for me, it's books with female narrators. So like Sylvia Plath's Bell Jar has always been a big one. I know it's very cliche, but it's this peek inside of her mind where you are. I love that you get the privilege of having that. Here's what I actually think about everything that I'm seeing. And I think that that's my reason that I love those female-led books so much, because that's true art. If you let somebody in at that level and you're willing to bare your soul and share, here's what I'm actually thinking behind the closed curtain, behind the closed door of my mind. Here's what I'm actually thinking as I'm looking out at the world and seeing everything around me. Those are my favorite books. I also just finished All Fours by Miranda July, who's not somebody I'd ever read before, but it was exactly that. It was, here's a peek inside my mind and at this bizarre experience that is life as a woman. And let me walk you through this wild ride that I've experienced so far. Obviously through the veil of fiction, but still, it just touches on all these things that like don't feel safe or comfortable to talk about one-to-one, even with your closest friends. A lot of the time, it's the stuff that's ugly and hard and unsexy and just like base animal. Here's what I actually think about the situation. I feel like when I can get invited into a writer's mind like that, that to me is so insightful because you get something that's real and true and you can feel it like in your bones.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So those two are two examples that jump out for me, but any book that does a good job where a female narrator is giving you that perspective of like, here's what I really think. That's what I love. I love that so much.
I think that's a good point. And I think that's why Untamed stood out to me a lot, is because it has a lot of that. It's very raw. It's very nuanced. Nuance is a big thing for me. I'm not really looking for like a self-helpy, like here's 10 steps to happiness or whatever. Like I like the nuance. I like that you're not romanticizing one side over the other. Like I like that you're giving me room to interpret and translate how I want or how it fits for me. Yeah. Makes sense.
Okay, so my next question, what do we do with these old versions of ourselves that contain a partial truth, but can no longer be kind of the whole identity? So I think that we all kind of have several working versions of ourselves that are all true, right? We have these different versions that we put on for different scenarios and different people that we hang out with. But how do you decide if the gap can be bridged and you want to maintain a friendship, for example, with like an old coworker at a job that you had like 10 years ago? How do you decide like this is worth maintaining and I can like basically catch them up to the version I'm at now versus who are the people you let kind of fall to the wayside and the friendships and the relationships that you kind of let fizzle out? That I think is part of this question of as you figure out what's more authentic and true for yourself, how do you take that into relationships and evaluate what to keep and what to cut?
I think for me, it is less to do with like how I've changed or which version I am now. And it's like connection is connection. So it's like if I still feel a connection with my friends from high school, then great. Like we still have our connection. We can let each other in on how we've changed, who we are now, and it still fits. It still works. Same with like the college friends I just hung out with. It's like we had that connection then, we have it now, and so it still fits, even though we're all so different. And I think that's how I evaluate it, because it's like there are friends from high school that the connection was never that real or that strong, and like the gap is too wide now, and just like it's not going to survive that. So I feel like it's just a matter of like, was the connection real? Is it still there? Great. Everything else can be figured out.
What about you, Allie?
Yeah, this is actually a question I've been thinking about a lot lately. Um, I think like provided somebody that I care about and I consider a friend, provided that they're changing and moving in a positive direction, I I appreciate my friends for who they I'm trying to figure out how to say this. Like I appreciate the delta. Like I enjoy
Mm,
change that people go through, provided it's constructive and positive and that they're happy and that, they're ultimately working towards this version or, always moving up and to the right kind of thing. And most of my friends, like all my friends are doing that. And even if it's choices and directions that they're moving in that maybe I don't understand, but they're happy about it and they're like I just want to love my friends for whatever stage that they're in. And I expect the same, frankly.
yeah. Yeah.
Um so I think when you think about the versions of yourself and you think about like your accessories like at the time, right? Like let's say you're a Barbie doll and like you have all these accessories that come with you, like the hobbies and the habits you have, the friendships that you have, maybe like the values and the principles. I feel like it's a matter of kind of figuring out if those things can adapt, and
Mm-hmm.
if they can come with you and adapt to who you are today, and if it's other people, can they respect who you are today even if they
Mm-hmm.
don't get it, because you can't asking someone to understand is a big ask, but I
It
don't think
is.
you need to understand to appreciate and respect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, I just don't think that's necessary. So I think if someone can be like, hey, I don't get it, but I think you're happy and I'm happy for you and I want to support you and I want to be someone you can lean on and like connect with. I think that those friendships can last. I think that's kind of a timeless friendship that they say. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think it's just like, can you move through space and time and just appreciate who each other is, regardless of like how much you understand each other, because I think when you're in
Yeah.
school, there's a lot in common. You're kind of on the same playing field,
Mm-hmm.
doing the same thing. A lot of just immersion, right? But then as you get
Mm-hmm.
older and like you have your partners and you maybe have a family and you do career things and you kind of go in different directions, I think you can still foster connection even if you don't have a ton in common. I think you have to have respect for each other though.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah, I think you said that really well. I think that that's kind of the qualifier that you should look for because again, time is finite, energy is finite, especially as you get more into your adult life, especially I'm sure as your life gets busier with work and family and everything. I feel like that's a good way to judge like what to keep versus what to cut. Like are they rooting for you as the protagonist in your own storyline regardless of if they would want that storyline for themselves? I feel like that's a really good gauge. And I think for me, it's a matter of it's kind of a vibe thing, right? So, like, right away within the first 5 to 10 seconds of if you are going to be able to pick up where you left off, essentially, with a friendship, because it's going to feel like work or it's going to feel easy. And I feel like that's the indicator. And I hate saying vibes is the indicator because it seems so vague, but it really is a gauge of like how hard is this for me to want to continue this conversation versus does it feel energizing? Does it feel exciting? Does it feel like, oh, like this person's rooting for me and I want to root for them and that feeling is mutual and you kind of feed off of that. I feel like very quickly you can kind of get a read on, well, I was friends with this person before. I haven't seen them in a long time. But like the way that they're operating with me in this context right now doesn't feel good, or maybe it does, and kind of act based on that. So like maybe you have this interaction set up, you're meeting up with a friend from college. A lot has happened in the gap between when you saw them last and when what your life is like now. But like, how does it feel? It's kind of a gut check on like, does this feel easy or does it feel hard? Because there's really no other way to gauge it. You're kind of just flying blind and you hope for the best. But I think what you said, Allie, makes a lot of sense, and I think that that's my gauge too. I think it's a matter of um, do I feel positive? Does it feel net positive when you walk away from the interaction? I feel like that's the easiest way to put it. And sometimes you're going to go into an interaction and it's not going to go well, and you're going to walk away and be like, well, that kind of sucked. But like then you're not going to repeat it. You're not going to invest more time and energy, hopefully, into it moving forward. But I feel like that in and of itself is kind of a nice thing about adult friendships, is like that process speeds up a lot. And so you save a lot of time. And the people that you do invest your time and energy with, it's more meaningful because it feels good for both people. Whereas when you're young, you're kind of like, I want to be everything to everyone all the time. And like, I just want to be with my friends all the time, regardless of if they make me feel bad or good. Like, this is the assignment. I want to do the assignment. And as you get older, you're just kind of like, nah, I don't think that's the assignment anymore. It's like, am I getting something from this? Do I feel good about this?
And that's usually where you can see like how the vibes is where you can see if you served a very specific purpose for somebody, or if that person like appreciated and loved and respected you regardless, right?
Yeah.
Because if you like reach this point in adulthood where you're like, I'm pretty good, pretty centered, I know who I am, I know the decisions I'm making for myself, and and if that's making somebody feel uncomfortable because you're no longer doing what they want to do, you're no longer who they want you to be. I think that's pretty telling.
Yeah. It's painful too, because sometimes you really want them to root for a version of you that's true, and they just can't. And that's one of, I think, the biggest, most heartbreaking things about being an adult is like that becomes very apparent very quickly.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
What do you do? So that's that. I think that should be a good like final question for this conversation is like, what do you do when you encounter somebody who is no longer a good fit for the present version of you, working version, work in progress? You're always changing too. What do you do if they keep wanting to hang out with you and like organize time together, and you're like, oh, this is just so much work.
Oh God.
This is so like, how do you gracefully bow out of those without being hurtful? I feel like this is an important conversation that a lot of people don't have, because
it's so hard.
And it's harder than ever with social media too, because you can maintain a faux friendship through social media pretty easily. But if they're wanting to like hang out with you and spend time with you on a regular basis, that's a different animal. And you really have to kind of come to terms with, how do I bow out of this gracefully? Any advice?
Oh, I don't know.
It's hard.
I feel like I have not run into this very much. Like I feel like it's always been mutual. Like if it's not a good fit anymore or something, like I feel like it always kind of just peters out on both sides.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like when you first come together and it's probably both sides have weird vibes. Like, oh, like Allie's not who I thought she was, and I'm like, oh, you make me feel like bad about myself. Yeah. And then it's like if neither one continues forward, then I've just let them go. I have had circumstances where someone's like wanted to stay in my life and just repeatedly made me feel bad for for being different than who I was, or, not making decisions that this person doesn't really understand. And in that case, I'm just super fucking honest. Like, well,
that's good.
This is me. Like, take it or leave it. And then it usually kind of chills out and they kind of get over themselves and kind of move on with who I am. And then it goes back to normal. But it's almost like you have to pull out a megaphone and be like, stop fucking judging me. Like, we're adults and we are allowed to change and adapt. It's just like, to me, it's like common sense.
Yeah.
Maybe not for everybody.
It's hard to do because it can feel a little confrontational to be like, look, like, I know we're both feeling weird right now. The vibes are off. Let's just talk about it. That's a hard thing to do because it's so much easier to just pretend that everything is fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Krista, any thoughts here?
No, I mean, again, it's like I haven't had a ton of experience. I feel like it's always been very mutual.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
That helps.
And that requires like a level of self-awareness that not everybody has.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah. I will say.
Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go.
I was going to say, I will say, I think social media sometimes helps, honestly, because I think that like, if you're in a situation where the vibes are off and maybe you want to like keep up with the person, but you don't want to put in a ton of effort, or vice versa, I feel like social media offers like a nice like bridge. Like you can keep up with each other and respond to each other's stories and have this kind of like very chill, like level of interaction without putting in a ton of effort on either side. And I feel like without that, maybe then it would be a little more awkward. But I think
that's fair.
Yeah,
that makes sense. I'm curious too. I wanted to ask this question: what is something about a future version of yourself that you are working towards strategically right now? Like, if there's a quality or a condition to your life that you don't have right now, what are you working towards achieving in the future? Because I feel like this is part of this conversation. It's like we look at ourselves as we are right now. We see the past versions. We see where we are now. We think about, what do I want for my future? What are you working towards right now? What is one thing, like, what's a goal you have for the next 6 to 12 months of like something you would like to actualize about your personality, your life, your situation, whatever? I'll go first since you two are thinking. Since
Thank
this
you.
is a random question
Thank you.
that I'm throwing at you. I think for me, again, continuation from last week, for a long time, I've been very bad at listening to myself and listening to what rings true to me. So what I'm doing right now is just trying to get better at like relearning how to listen to that voice, being very strategic about like, here are things that I feel intimidated about, scared about, like I could improve about, and like, what are realistic activities that I can do to take strategic steps towards getting better at that? So, like, what are the things that scare me and how can I work at being less afraid of them? And so for me, that's like volunteer activities. It's like going to therapy, trying different kinds of therapy, reading a lot of books, listening to a lot of podcasts, being very open to a lot of perspectives. I feel like the openness is a really good way to tackle insecurities because you're not like, that's not for me. It's kind of like, well, let me try this on and see if it feels right. So that's where I'm at right now. Just like trying on a lot of things and seeing like what feels true and how do I learn to listen to myself through those types of experiences. What about you
proud
guys?
of you.
Thank you. Thanks. It's hard. It's hard work.
I feel like I'm actively battling this, like my perfectionism, where I'm still very much, even though I've gotten a little bit better, I'm still very much, or my default approach is all or nothing. Like if I can't go to the gym for 60 minutes, then I shouldn't even go. Right. Which doesn't make any sense. Like 5 minutes is better than 0.
Of course.
So I think I'm focused on like incremental gains, like being okay with half measures, knowing that like 1% every day is better than nothing. And I think like over time, hopefully I'll either be able to give whatever I'm focused on my all, or it will end up summing up to 100 and really being able to see like the incremental gains. It also requires some patience, right? Which is not my strong suit, but
which is a good practice.
Towards like, I've set some new goals for myself, like a couple new things that scare me that I'd like to try over the next couple of years. And it's going to be like slow moving. And same with like self-care and like health related stuff. So just small steps.
That's good. I like that. I like the idea that like the tiny steps will get you to 100. Yeah. It doesn't have to be 100 on the first day. I like that. I struggle with that too. So obviously it speaks to me. What about you, Krista? What do you got?
I think I would agree with Kaylee. I think like the part about listening to myself a little more. I think listening to myself, also trying to discern like what is me listening to myself and what is selfishness. I think I'm struggling with that balance of like, this is me listening to myself and sticking up for myself versus I'm being selfish right now. I think that is like something I am working on right now / trying to figure out for myself, and probably will be for the near to long term future. Yeah.
Do you find that you have any activities that help you get better at this?
In terms of the like trying to figure out what's healthy listening to myself versus selfishness,
Right. Because it's
No.
kind of a meta thing.
Yeah,
It's
like,
a meta thing. It's like,
not
how do
really.
you make incremental progress on something so
Yeah.
vague?
Yeah, it's super hard. I mean, I think like I probably should journal more. I've done a little bit of that in the past couple of weeks, and it's always super helpful to see my thoughts written out and kind of like see them from a different angle. I think that is always very helpful. But yeah, other than that, I feel like it's a little hard. Yeah.
It's kind of one of those, like, you just kind of keep living your life and like you kind of observe what happens.
Yeah.
Which is hard because, especially for all of us, like marketer minded, we're like, data, like, let me get a plan in place and make steps.
Yeah. Track my
check
progress.
my KPIs. Yeah. Yes. And it's so hard when it comes to our actual lives because it's so, I don't know, it's so great. It's such a gray area. It's hard.
It's a gray area, and you can collect as many perspectives as you want, but it's still, it's helpful, but it's not really the thing that's going to get you to what you need at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Which is so frustrating.
It is. Any other thoughts before we wrap up here on this topic of like, how do we're always evolving, we're always becoming a new version of ourselves. Like, any other thoughts here on things that you found to be helpful or that you think listeners should think about if they're kind of in the same boat?
I have a question for y'all in terms of like, when it comes to the fact that we are always changing, like that is a fact. So is that something that scares you about being a human and interacting with other people who are always changing? Or does that excite you?
It excites me.
Yeah.
Say more.
I know what it's like to feel stuck in who I am and where I am and who I'm with. And when I realized that I wasn't, and I took the action required to get free, which sounds really aggressive, but it's true. I wasn't unsafe or anything. I just was stuck. It made me feel so much more control. It made me feel so much more. I mean, control is relative because obviously we can't always control like the ebbs and flows of life and people and all that stuff. But it just made me feel like a little bit more free to
it's kind of a release of control, really. Yeah.
Wasn't there a song when we were kids, like "Free to Be Me"?
I think probably. So. That sounds
free
familiar.
To be you and me. Anyway, I just had the biggest flashback to like a cassette tape my parents had at home. Anyway, I just think there's so much freedom and so much excitement to the fact that like, okay, here's an example. I'm going to get my private pilot's license because I want to.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Because I want to. And the and the fact that like I could do that, and this is a minute example, right? Like there are career paths, there are relationships, there are like huge dreams that people have that take a lot of fucking work and a lot of money and a lot of things falling into place. So this is not a good example, but it's just like after I've done improv and I've realized like I can do and be and live wherever and whoever and whatever I want to be. I don't know. That's just so exciting to me. You know,
it's so exciting. Yes.
I can see where it would be scary, especially if you have like analysis paralysis or you don't really know where to start. Or if the prospect of changing a lot of your life in order to grant that freedom means losing a lot of what you know, that can be really scary. But I just know there's better things on the other side.
Yes.
Like I've been there and
it's kind of the hero's journey, right? Like Joseph Campbell, every story, like it all follows the same thing. And like everybody rejects the call for a long time, but then you finally get to a place where you can't reject it anymore. And you're like, this is my time. This is my one spin here. I got to do this right. And so I think that that's probably another version of like the existential crisis of like, oh no, what am I doing here? This doesn't feel right. And so to grasp at things like that feel like exciting and optimistic and hopeful, I feel like that is kind of the name of the game when it comes to thinking about how we're always changing and evolving, because otherwise, again, you get stuck. If you don't let yourself do that, you get stuck in an old pattern or an old way of being, and it just doesn't feel true past a certain point. And so you're you keep bumping up against the walls of this like, something doesn't feel right here and I don't know what it is. And it's probably that like rejection of the call of like, you need to do something differently. And why are you pushing so hard? Why are you resisting? Why are you resisting that? So I'm with you. I think it's very optimistic. I think it's scary. It's terrifying. But I think it's very exciting. I think it will either pin you in place forever and keep you in a way of being that maybe doesn't feel right, but is functional, or it's an opportunity for optimism and hope and change. And it gives you something to look forward to. And the reality is that optimism could 100% not pay off. It could be like, this was a fool's errand. I'm miserable. Things went terribly, but it's this like, I hope that it goes well. I really hope it goes well. And I'm always rooting for that character that's like, I hope for the best.
I think that's why I love Under the Tuscan Sun so much.
Yes, we root for the underdog.
Such a random movie.
Oh, the odds are against me. Yes.
I've never seen that.
You got to watch it.
Oh my God. It's like peak Diane Lane. She's beautiful and she lives in Italy and she's just doing her life. And I think she's like in her 40s and
yes.
I love it. I love it so much.
Yes. Chasing her bliss for sure.
Why, Krista? How do you feel about it?
I think overall, like it's exciting and I feel optimistic about it. I mean, it's scary that like when you are not the focus of that and it's like someone in your life is changing or, I think that is scary. Like that idea is scary to me. But yeah, I think overall like an exciting thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Good chat.
Well, hopefully our listeners have some stuff to chew on after this conversation. I feel like it was a good one. We covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, for sure.
My drink's gone. I would cheers you, but she's gone.
I'm a little
She's empty.
I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. Well, anyways, good chat. Off the clock. Back again.
Cheers.
Empty cheers.
Bye.